Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for joining this webinar on the importance of physical security in 2023. I'm really excited for the content that Dalton and James will be sharing today, and I'll be moderating for this. Just as an introduction, or before we get to that, we will be distributing the recording for anybody that is unable to attend. So look out for that afterwards. My name is Kirk Hayes. I'm the managing principal security consultant. I have over 10 years in information security, performing penetration testing and red teaming in a variety of domains within. Before that, I was a systems administrator, and I performed facilities security and personnel security as well. I'm the physical security service line owner here at LRQA Netitude, and I'll be moderating today. Our speakers today are Dalton Wright, senior security consultant at LRQA Netitude. He's a physical security and internal network professional and enthusiast, performing many of those types of engagements. He has over 5 years experience working in the industry, and he also has his ASIS physical security professional certification, which goes into depth on all aspects of physical security. He's joined by James Stewart, who's a senior security consultant here at LRQA Netitude as well. He has over 4 years working in the penetration testing department, and he's recently moved into the red teaming here, performing simulated threat actor or threat actor simulated engagements against some of our most secure and mature customers. He's conducted multiple physical security engagements in the UK and brings a wealth of knowledge from that aspect. He's also mentored many of the consultants that are performing physical security engagements today. Before we get into their content, just to tell you a little bit about LRQA Netitude, who we are and what we do. We are a research-led, globally trusted cybersecurity consultancy, which is part of the LRQA organization. We have over 20 years experience working with our customers in a wide variety of their cybersecurity needs. We have a highly accredited team where we hold many industry accreditations. In fact, we're the only organization in the world with the full suite of CREST accreditations. We also are part of the CREST industry influencing team. We work with them to influence and guide the way these certifications go. Also working with governments in the UK and overseas as well. We also have very active participation in financial and government-led cybersecurity regulated frameworks such as CBEST. We do have a strong portfolio of professional and managed services covering everything from vulnerability assessments and pen testing to threat intelligence-led testing such as STAR engagements, as well as SOC, IR, and many other services as well. So with that, the reason we're all here is to understand the importance of physical security in 2023. Dalton and James are going to be talking about what is physical security and social engineering and giving a good definition of each of those so we're all on the same page. And then they'll move into why is physical security important in the first place? Why should we care? And how does that look like in 2023 currently? They'll also go through a physical security assessment, how that validates policies and controls, and giving stories about how everything works, and real life stories from actual engagements, so you can see how that progresses. Throughout the webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A, and we'll take questions and answers at the end. With that, I'll turn it over to Dalton and James.
Thanks, Kirk. Good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Dalton. So before we go too far, we figured it'd be best to just kind of have some basic definitions, just so everyone's on the same page when we're saying certain terms and using terminology. So first First and foremost, physical security at its most simplest is the use of people, processes, and security controls to protect assets. Additionally, social engineering, simply put, is trying to get people to perform actions for you. And within the realm of physical security and social engineering, there's kind of a subtype of social engineering called physical social engineering, which is a technique used by physical pen testers as well as potential attackers using human interaction to try to gain access to unauthorized access to systems or data. An example of which would be, trying to talk your way past the front desk employee, seeing if they'll let you into the building, or once inside the building, trying to talk someone into letting you into a server room, pretending to be an electrician or a IT consultant or things, something of that nature. So another question worth considering is, why is physical security important? Again, at its core, every company has something that they are trying to protect. This can take all shapes and forms, various forms of data, personally identifiable information, hardware, systems running a given company's business, thinking, web servers, backend databases, things of that nature, whose outages or interruptions would cause a significant opportunity cost for potential sales or damage to brand reputation. Things such as obviously employees and intellectual property and things of that nature are also extremely important to protect within any given site or building. Again, at its core, when you think about your given company and what you're trying to protect and your most valuable assets, whatever form those may take, a good question to consider is essentially, what's to stop someone from walking into said office or building and taking those assets, or again, start unplugging servers within a server room, or walk in and grab a bunch of folders containing intellectual property and walking out. What's stopping someone from doing that? So outside of physical security, from a more concern of just kind of protecting of intellectual property and corporate information and things of that nature, there's also a safety aspect that is extremely important, especially when it comes to protecting employees at a given office, as well as any other individuals working there as well, third-party vendors, customers visiting the office and things of that nature. So physical security plays a huge role in safety as well. When it comes to actual physical security attacks that we see in the real world, generally speaking, primary targets tend to consist of sites where an outage or some other successful breach would have a large impact outside of just that site itself. So a few examples of industries like that would be healthcare, thinking, hospitals, if they lost power and the backup generator, that has a significant impact on everyone there and has a potential impact of again, more than just the people at that site. Critical infrastructure, power, water, things of that nature. Again, if a malicious individual is able to cut through some barbed wire, use a bolt cutter to cut a padlock, and then can just start flipping switches and cutting a few wires, and now thousands of people don't have power, that's a significant impact and a pretty good return on investment from an attacker standpoint in terms of effort and time expended versus the breadth of what they're able to accomplish. So critical infrastructure is another particularly interesting target from an attacker's perspective, as well as financial companies as well can often be targeted. Again, in these instances, it's more than just the damage to a given company's brand, but it goes beyond that, in that, again, and customers and end users are significantly impacted, and again, like a potential quality of life impact beyond just a corporate website being down for a few hours. And then the other kind of aspect, aside from the higher impact industries, comes down to more traditionally what people will think when they're thinking of physical security. particularly for industries like retail, where it's, armed robbery and shoplifting is the primary focus and kind of a common issue that industries of that nature face in terms of, again, just thievery in any form. Again, can someone walk in and steal a very valuable tool from a home improvement store or similar? So while we're talking about physical security, it's worth noting how has the physical security landscape changed because of COVID. And generally speaking, the security landscape actually didn't change that much. What was relevant 5 to 10 years ago is more or less the same and still relevant these days. But the change of the work landscape did have some interesting impacts from a physical security, physical pen testing perspective, or again, malicious individual trying to break into a company perspective. So before COVID, most things were on site, not many remote workers at a given office. Again, at the end of the day, most companies within a given office, the data, servers, people, assets, whatever form those take, were all primarily on site. And then when COVID happened, significantly fewer people were in the office. And this ended up being kind of a double-edged sword from a physical pen testing perspective, in that if there's only 4 people in a given office, and you're trying to break in, you're going to stand out a lot more, especially if it's a smaller office. But on the flip side, if you successfully break in, there's significantly fewer people to potentially catch you. If it's a large enough office, you can walk in different areas than where people might be. Again, that could make it significantly easier to break in, or once you're in, to remain undetected. Additionally, with the addition of face masks, that makes it significantly harder to recognize people, and more to the point, to recognize that you actually don't recognize someone, as opposed to just being kind of a generic person wearing business casual clothes. And with a face mask on, you can kind of blend into the crowd fairly easily, or I guess in that sense, there wouldn't be much of a crowd. But so during COVID, fewer people in office on any given day. Masks make it harder to recognize people. And then from a work perspective, most people were moving to remote or some form of hybrid. So again, at the end of the day, from an attacker's perspective, there was potentially a lot of unattended or insecure, or just fairly ill-protected assets sitting in a lot of these empty or near empty offices. And there was a definite noted increase of stealing in quite a few cities, as you can see in these headlines, or from the excerpt in this article. And then when it comes to quote unquote post-COVID, most people are going back to the office or doing some form of hybrid, partial, sometimes working remotely, sometimes going into the office. Generally speaking, it's still fewer people in the office on any given day. But this also created an interesting edge case where people that were hired to given companies during COVID, other individuals at the office might not know what they look like. So essentially new hires that have been hired since COVID started. So again, from a pretext perspective, which a pretext is essentially just your cover story as a physical pen tester or attacker, in terms of why your explanation as to why you're there and what you're doing. This provides a pretty useful pretext for pen testers to essentially say, oh, I was hired during COVID, this is my first time visiting the office, or things of that nature. That can definitely be easier as an explanation as to why people wouldn't necessarily recognize you in the office. So like we talked about a little bit earlier, there's definitely been an increase in the relevancy, or just a noted increase in physical security attacks. So particularly here, the one in the middle and the one below, talking about things like we talked about earlier. Again, the main categories come down to either items of value or assets of value that you could potentially take. So retail and other similar industries, or from a large impact standpoint, again, healthcare, critical infrastructure, and financial. So when we talk about physical security, there are a few different areas of focus, specifically people, policies, and controls. So how those interact with each other. Essentially, controls implement the policies. A policy itself is just how something should be, and people enforce and ensure policies are being followed, and generally speaking, are often the weakest link when it comes to physical security. So as an example, let's say that there is a policy, a closed door policy for the main entrance at an office. You have a control, which is an RFID badge reader that keeps the main entrance locked at any given moment. And the only way to open said door would be presenting a valid RFID badge and opening the door. But if employees aren't properly enforcing that and they badge into the office and let someone tailgate them, essentially just walking behind them or like holding the door for them and letting them walk into the building with them, that would be an example where again, most of the time people are holding doors out of habit or because they want to be nice. Not many people will actually stop and challenge them or say, I can't let you in. I have to, you have to badge in, even if that is ostensibly the company's policy. In that instance, those security controls have been undermined because the door was held open, and the policy itself has been improperly or insufficiently enforced. So we test these three, the people, policies, and controls when performing a physical security assessment. And the best way to demonstrate what these components of physical security look like and how they may fall short, we're going to tell a story about a physical security engagement.
Thank you, Dalton. So we're going to demonstrate some of these techniques, people, policies, and controls against a fictional client called Acme Incorporated, as you can see here. So it's completely fictional. We haven't related this to any particular client. We obviously know there's a lot of clients out there with or associated or have the title of Acme, but for this instance, it's completely fictional. However, all the tactics that we're going to use in this example are real life tactics performed part of real engagements. So let's take a look at some of the details about Acme Corp. So it's got one large office that's in scope. That's 100 to 300 employees on any given day. That it's part of the financial industry. So what some of the goals that they set out to us initially when they came to us with work is, can we access their financial data? Can we determine the security awareness of their employees? And can we gain access to the internal network? So typically how we start some of these engagements, in this example, we'll start off with some remote reconnaissance that's done off-site. So in this example, we're not going to cover how the reconnaissance is done or the open source intelligence gathering phase, just to save a bit of time, but we're going to pretend that that's been done already. But just to note, from our data collection, we typically start with off-site reconnaissance in the form of a Google Earth or Street View that is used to map out these targets, these offices, or these sites that a client will come to us with. It's very useful for the remote reconnaissance because we can see entrances, nearby shops, some parking lots, side entrances, loading docks, etc. You get the gist. So we take this information, we'll build a good understanding of the building, the surroundings, and anything that can help us understand the organization. So with this information, I've hopefully built up a good report. That includes things like leverage points, like nearby parking lots that can be used to observe employees' patterns in terms of walking in and out of the building, and anything like CCTV cameras, smoking areas, loading docks that contractors may use. And I can build this report and then pass it on to Dalton for his phase, which is the on-site reconnaissance.
All right, so first day of the engagement, I'm sitting on site in a car in a parking lot nearby within eyeshot of the entrance. Again, like James said, I'm observing employees, if nothing else, just to get an idea of kind of the general foot traffic patterns in terms of around what time employees are showing up at a given day, and how many people are kind of going into the office at any given point. If everyone rushes in at once, or if it's a pretty constant flow of employees throughout the day who arrive at different times. So as I see an employee heading towards the entrance, I leave. I get out of my car and I start walking towards the entrance to the office as well. Thanks to some on-site and remote reconnaissance, I know that the main entrance consists of a pair of double doors, so essentially a man trap in the sense that the exterior main doors are unlocked at all times, but the interior doors to actually gain access to the office. Otherwise, it's just a very small room. You have to do a successful RFID badge to open the second pair of doors. So I deliberately walk fast enough, trying to be slightly faster than the pace of the employee that's walking up to the building. So I get to the door slightly sooner than they do, so I can hold the exterior unlocked doors open for them. Again, this is a helpful trick from a tailgating perspective, especially if you know that one of the doors is going to be unlocked if there's multiple levels. This just increases the likelihood that, if nothing else, out of politeness or reciprocity, that this employee will hold the door open for me, again, returning the favor. So I hold the first door open for them. They're just showing up for work, so they're not really thinking too much about things, or they're just thinking about normal work stuff. So they badge into the office and hold the door open behind them as they're walking in as well. So now I've gained entrance, I've successfully tailgated into the office. So now that I'm inside the office, I'm just kind of quickly looking around to try to get a better idea of where things are and where best to proceed. The front desk employee is currently on coffee break, as the sign indicates, and no one else is really in the front entry area. I see rows of cubicles ahead, so I walk forward confidently. I have a badge on a lanyard that has just like a default RFID value, which may or may not work, but again, just to look the part. So I'm walking forward. I head towards the back of the office, as I'm just less likely to be seen once I'm there, and again, less foot traffic on any given moment. I find an empty cubicle and I duck into that and begin performing some basic egress and network access control checks by plugging my laptop into the internal network. I'm just trying to get an idea of what protocols, ports, and combinations of which will successfully leave the internal network, so we can know if we need to make any adjustments to our Dropbox, so we can ensure that the Dropbox can successfully call back to our external infrastructure once we're no longer at the site. A few employees walk past the cubicle during the day. It's not until around the fourth employee walks by that they stop and notice that this otherwise normally empty cubicle is actually occupied. And because I have a bunch of terminals and other generic networking looking things open on my laptop, they ask if, is there a problem with the network? So in this instance, I provide my pretext, so cover story, and I say I'm an IT contractor and I'm here to diagnose the network issues. There have been some complaints about slow internet speeds and occasionally connection issues. This is a fairly generic pretext, and in some senses is pretty useful, just because since it is a little bit generic, it's likely relevant to basically any company, because at pretty much any office there will be the occasional internet issues or complaints about slow internet speeds and things of that nature. Since it's such a universal thing, it doesn't necessarily beg too many more questions. So I have I have like an example vendor form on me and things of that nature, but the employee actually just takes this as face value and doesn't push us for further verification. They just accept the story for what it is, and they say, "Oh, okay, I'm Bob, the office manager. Let me know if you need anything." So crisis successfully averted, and I continue on as is. So later on in the day, again, I'm wrapping up the egress testing. A different employee walks by and asks what I'm working on. I give them the same speech about being an IT contractor, although this time, since we've already talked to Bob, the office manager, and at least established some base level rapport, we can actually just name drop Bob and say, I've already talked to Bob about it, which gives our story an ostensible purpose for being here, some additional validity, and gives the employee, if they're curious, someone to actually go and talk to, and if they have further questions. So the employee actually does go and talk to Bob and asks if there's supposed to be someone working on the network. Bob vouches for me, says I'm supposed to be there, and this other employee walks off. So again, we successfully, again, in some senses, physically social engineered and kind of maintained our status as an individual supposed to be there. And now that second employee, because the office manager vouched for us, isn't necessarily going to bother us anymore, or they've had their question answered, so they're no longer necessarily curious or giving us any more thought, which is extremely helpful. So many companies have a clean desk policy. Aside from just aesthetic and cleanliness perspectives, there's also sometimes the concern of information leakage and compromise of sensitive data. Like we talked about earlier, if someone just tailgated into an office, grabbed a bunch of random folders and walked out, again, do those folders have sensitive information, client data or employee data, things of that nature. So it seems that the employees at this company aren't really following the clean desk policy. So I'm looking through the IT employees' desks, cubicles, and as I'm going through, again, I'm not fortunate enough to find any badges, but I do find a kind of badge permission map, essentially showing what employees have what roles, and separate from that, what roles have permissions to access which rooms. So based on this, it looks like I'll need either an IT employee badge or security guard badge to gain access to the server room. Unfortunately, it seems like the IT employees primarily work remotely, but will have some sort of general hybrid setup. But again, the odds are that they'll show up during the engagement is maybe too much of a gamble. So we decide we'll target the security guard. So I figure I'll get caught by the security guard if I stay much longer. So I leave for the day and go and update the Dropbox device and pass it off to James to pick it up from there.
Brilliant, thank you, Dalton. So we're now going to demonstrate some social engineering against Acme Incorporated. So we're going to attempt to convince a receptionist. We are a contractor arriving to do unexpected fixed electrical testing. So how may Netitude prepare for this? So we're going to use some real-life tactics that Netitude have used in multiple engagements. One being looking the part. So how do fixed electrical engineers dress? What hours did they work? Are they going to be turning up in the morning, afternoon, during work hours as a contractor? We also have to look the right age for the pretext. So we've got to make sure that we are of age. We're not a young college student or a very senior person who might not fit the role as well as someone, let's say in the 20s to 40s. So obviously we need to know the location and the culture of the organization we're targeting. So are they non-native language speaking? Is the given location particularly diverse? All of this builds into our pretext in terms of what we arrive at and how we look. So let's talk about the Dropbox. So we need to prepare a Dropbox. So in this instance, from the images, we've got a Raspberry Pi with 4G hat that is concealed within a TP link. So there's a bit of prep that's went into this. We've created the Dropbox from the information that Dalton has provided. So obviously, when he was in the building, we've looked at things such as network access controls, any connectivity issues, and comms methods in terms of DNS, HTTPS, and all part of the egress testing that he's conducted to make sure that we can deliver a good Dropbox that are able to persist on their network and give us network access. So obviously, being everything right, we turn up on the day of the engagement, and we show up quite late afternoon because the people are a bit more relaxed at this time, and obviously people are getting a bit tired with the day, and we hope that the receptionist is a bit more builds into our story and approves what we're trying to deliver. So we are dressed in the electrical uniform. We've got our toolbox. The toolbox got the Dropbox within it. We've also lined the toolbox with an RFID reader and badge cloner for the purposes of if we have the chance, we will be cloning a badge. And we'll tailgate through the reception and then purposely stop at the front desk to try and get and test the security awareness of the receptionist. So a conversation may go such as, I'm here to perform fixed electrical testing, and they're most likely going to respond with that they don't have it on their schedule. So at this point, we need to build some credibility. So we come with a contract of employment, as shown in the image there. Obviously, this has been prepared beforehand. A lot of work's gone in from Netitude's side to prepare all this stuff. So the likely response to this is that we don't have anything on our schedule, and we'll just need to check this. In terms of what we can then do is we can provide numbers to the receptionist to give a bit of credibility to say, yeah, we're definitely here. I've got my manager's number, and this might lead to a phone call that hopefully we've got our other consultant on the line, which is Dalton, that might answer the phone and just say, hey, yes, this is my employee. He's meant to be here today. We've been doing there's been some complaints of outages in the region by the electrical company, and we're doing some fixed electrical testing, just building a bit more credibility and rapport into our story. So the conversation goes back and forth. They end the call, and hopefully at this point the receptionist is convinced with our story, and we get let into the office. So once we're inside, I'm going to be walking around the office. Obviously, we need to blend in, so we don't want to go guns blazing and target a network port if it's a busy office. So we need to gauge the situation. If it's not as busy, we can go straight for a desk and try and plug in our Dropbox. But likely it's going to be busy, so we'll end up at some type of outlet or socket, and we'll do some fixed electrical testing that we've learned about the day before. So we're looking around at this outlet once we're doing all this, and we're looking for a good spot to target, something that's away from employees, maybe an unoccupied place of the office. And during this time, we're just blending in. If anyone comes in, we've got our pretext, or if anyone asks us what we're doing, we've got our pretext. But we've got our fingers crossed that no one's going to say anything. So we find an unoccupied place of the desk, and we plug in our device, which is concealed to look like a regular TP-Link box that we've built. So it blends in with the office equipment. So at this point, I've successfully installed the Dropbox into the network. I'm looking for any badges in the meantime that are lying around, any type of confidential information that I can take from desks that are unoccupied. And I'm just stalling at this point until a security guard turns up and questions us. So at this point, obviously, we still need, and then obviously from Dalton's information, we found out that security guard may have quite a high level of access in terms of his badge or security access cards. So what we're doing is when he shows up, they might ask, okay, it's quite late in the afternoon, everyone's left at this point, where we build our story of we're a fixed electrical tester. We show them our fake vendor form that we've showed to the receptionist already. And obviously at this point, we're within the building, so the reputation's already been built, because the likelihood of a receptionist approving this type of work is already helped our story in terms of the security guard not being so suspicious. So at this point, it's a good measure of the security guard's employee awareness. How do they follow procedures? Do they question us? Do they not question us? And obviously, we can report on this in the final report. So obviously, we notice that the access badge on this employee in this instance is on the chest, and we understand that the likelihood a lot of privileges from Dalton's information that he gathered about the access controls. So what we do is we know that our toolbox is lined with an RFID reader, so we can just pass them the toolbox, say that we're going to tie our shoelace. We take a clone of the badge that is successful. They hand our security, our toolbox back, and then both of us walk together towards the exit. We both say goodbye. The main entrance looks to be locked, so we go out the side entrance. And in this time, what we're doing is we're building anything we can about the business in terms of information. So we're always doing this reconnaissance, looking for security cameras, looking for any weaknesses from internally that can be given to Dalton. But at this point, we've got a successful badge clone. So I leave and I pass the clone badge to Dalton with the internal information for him to try and achieve the last objective, which is the financial data.
All right, so the next afternoon, I badge into the side entrance using the badge cloned with the value of the security guard's badge. So I successfully badge into the office that way. It's towards the end of the day, but I'm trying to target the time between most employees having left for the day, but while still being before the security guard starts their first rounds of walking the building. So I go and hide in the bathroom for a few hours. Again, I'm just waiting for most employees to leave so we can try to get into the IT room undisturbed, again using the security guard's badge. So it's 6 or 7 p.m. at that point, and I go and successfully badge into the IT room again using the security guard badge that we cloned earlier. It's at this point that I discovered that similar to the main entrance, there's actually an outer and inner layer. So there's an outer IT server room and an inner IT server room. And it turns out the security guard actually doesn't have permission to badge into the inner IT room. So at this point, I have to improvise and think on my feet. I go back and think on just common physical security vulnerabilities, and I'm assessing the door and the room as a whole for these potential vulnerabilities. Things like improper strike plate placement, REX sensors behind the door potentially, gaps between the door if it's a set of double doors or under the door, external hinges on the door itself. Luckily, in this instance, there's a gap under the door, like you can see in the picture on the left. So I use a tool called the under the door tool, which is shown on the right, which essentially you insert under the door and use it similar to how it's shown in the picture, except with the majority of it on the inside of the door. And you can use it to pull the lever, the inside door handle, while still being on the outside of the door. So after a few minutes messing with that under the door tool, I successfully pull the lever, open the door, and gain access to the inner IT server room. I take some pictures for just to prove that we were able to gain access to it and for the purposes of reporting. And at this point, again, we've successfully achieved that objective and gained access to the inner IT server room. So just to recap on what the goals were, and again, be thinking about how people, policy, and controls fit into this, and that plays into the report as well in terms of shortcomings of any of these three. So first goal was gain access to the server room, which we achieved. First, finding the badge policy on the IT employee's desk. Second, by successfully cloning the security guard's badge. And then thirdly, by using the under the door tool to get into the inner server room. The next goal was testing the security awareness of employees. So there were a few lapses of this. One, in the fact that we were able to tailgate into the building multiple times. There were also insufficient validations and checks by both the front desk employee as well as the office manager. And then the third goal was to gain access to the internal network, which we achieved when we placed the Dropbox on the internal network during the fixed electrical testing. So like we said earlier, please put any and all questions you may have in the chat. Yeah, thanks everyone for coming to the presentation. I think we'll go to questions now.
Thanks, Dalton and James. I thought that was really informative and really good content. So like Dalton said, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A in the chat, and we can get to those. To start, Dalton and James, when it comes to these types of engagements, what's the reporting aspect look like for that? Is it a report? Is there a debrief? How is that taken care of at the end?
Yeah, I can take this one. So yeah, generally speaking, reporting is fairly similar in the sense of similar to other non-physical security engagement types, in the sense that it consists of the identified vulnerabilities during the engagement. They tend to have more sections within them. Typically, there's also kind of a large section, which is the attack narrative. So essentially, the story that we just walked through would be a large part of the report, essentially walking through, okay, again, here was the first entry attempt and what we achieved and what we learned, and interactions with employees and things of that nature. So we can provide more detail on security awareness and identifying lapses of that, of what the exact conversation was and things of that nature. And then aside from that, there will also be a significant number of photos just for documentation purposes, and documenting things like the remote reconnaissance or the on-site reconnaissance. And then from there, the findings themselves would be drawn and identified separately within the same report.
Great, thank you. Another question we have is, do you do more targeted technical exploitation? So attacks against locks, alarms, sensors, those types of things, or do you tend to focus more on the SE side of things exclusively?
Feel free to jump in, James, if you have anything to add. I guess from my 2 cents, it normally essentially we're always going to kind of come down to the path of least resistance. Again, since tailgating is going to work, let's say 9 times out of 10 or things of that nature. In a pinch, if we have to, we'll lockpick. But between social engineering working a lot of the time and/or the existence of a lot of physical security vulnerabilities that I kind of briefly touched on. In a lot of instances, you don't actually even necessarily need to lockpick. There's, again, sometimes workarounds where you don't need to actually pick the lock. There's a way to bypass the badge reader or whatever protection that the doors may have. So generally speaking, I would consider that kind of the third line. I mean, I guess you could consider lock bypassing kind of in a similar vein, but I think it would essentially go some form of social engineering, then any lock bypass means, and then as kind of more of a last resort than doing lock picking. But it's definitely something we do on occasion, but for the most part, we don't actually tend to need to. And it mostly will just come down to whatever's easiest and most likely to work.
Yeah, I agree, Dalton. So just adding to that, what Dalton said, I think obviously we tend to categorize our service in the physical security line into 2 sections, which is obviously a physical security assessment and a covert entry assessment. So when we look at obviously a covert entry that we've been talking about here, which includes a lot of the social engineering, we see that we're using things to try and get access to the building to achieve a goal, and we're taking the path of least resistance, like Dalton said. But within a physical security assessment, we go throughout the building. We test the locks, the alarms, the sensors, and anything in terms of strike placement. So this can obviously to client needs. If this is a concern for yourselves, then we can involve this into our physical security assessment, which is a bit different from covert entry assessment. Dalton knows a lot more about that. He's the one who's introduced this concept. But I would say if that was something that the client needed, then that's something that we would go down that route rather than a covert entry assessment.
Thank you. Another question here: how you cloned a badge of the security guard and did all that. Is there a way to protect against those types of attacks with the long range badge reader?
Yeah, so there's a few things. Obviously, we've all heard about the RFID blocking wallets and pouches. So obviously, when we're talking about access within and out of the building, we don't really want to be using sleeves, but it's a measure that we can do. We can put these access cards within sleeves, and that adds a layer of protection that blocks the RFID signal. So this might potentially stop it. Another thing is just situational awareness, employee awareness. We ask employees keep this in a location that is out of reach. So in their pockets, in the bag, work bags, away from visible. So a badge clone is a lot harder, but it can still happen in these cases. So then we go towards things such as encrypted RFID cards. So we can use things like MyFair Plus, iClass, DesFire cards, Evolution 1 to 3. We can use all these type of high frequency cards that uses all such things as AES encryption. That is a lot stronger than just your typical RFID cards that you see in many organizations.
Great. In the example engagement, when you re-entered towards the end and kind of hid in the bathroom or were waiting to go to the server room and figure that out, are you armed with any kind of pretext or cover story? There's a fair chance that someone might be around, so kind of the question, person who asked the question is interested in how you deal with that if you did run into somebody during that time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say generally speaking, anytime you're entering in a building, you want to have some form of pretext, even if you think the building is going to be empty. You don't want to be caught off guard. I'd say in that instance specifically, well, I guess first of all, for hiding in the bathroom, we're pretty even if there's people there, it's fairly unlikely people will bother us because, again, from a just a general employee perspective, the odds of seeing someone else in the bathroom, especially if we're just like hiding in a stall and thinking it's like, oh, I should probably check if this person trying to break into the building versus it's just like, okay, it's just a random person using the bathroom. I would say in that instance, we would probably just claim to be a employee of the company, probably say we're from a different office and we're visiting and like we're working late that day, or you were staying late to work on a presentation because you're about to fly out to another office. We have enough on us to
might have lost Dalton mid-sentence there. While we wait to see if he can get back on. James, maybe you can answer this one. Is there a list of controls and physical barriers that you can test, or is there anything like that we have?
Yeah, so now that you follow a methodology in terms of what we commonly see, but we tend to adapt and improvise in terms of essentially anything that we might see out of place at the time. So we're always looking for the least resistance, as Dalton mentioned before, so any weaknesses. So we go through all our procedures in terms of there is more commonly used pretexts and social engineering aspects that we use, but it's just one of them things. It all is situational dependent. And every employee is different. You've got different organizations, different building sizes. Some have employees that are 40, some have employees that are over 1,000. So we tend to tailor our testing in our approach to that particular client. Obviously, some are a lot more sophisticated than the others. So it all really depends. But we've got a list of a methodology we use, and we try to follow that to the best of our ways. But with any type of social engineering, it's all situational dependent, as I mentioned before.
Great, thank you. See if there's any more questions in the chats. Doesn't look like it. I guess one last question. In your opinion, when it comes to physical security testing, is there a tool that's the most useful for those types of engagements?
I think in this case, obviously, we can use the example. Having a correct pretext prior is probably our best tool. A lot of the reconnaissance use a lot of the tools that we use day to day. So gaining an understanding of the building beforehand is obviously quite useful. In terms of a one tool fits all, I don't agree with. I think we have to look at many organizations and how they differ. A lot of them have different security approaches, different ways and security postures that they are currently. So in that case, I think if there was one tool we use most, then often it would be a common tool that's part of every engagement, which would be some form of reconnaissance, because that is part of all engagements and probably the most important phase of the engagement as it builds our picture, our pretext, and everything that we're looking to do, and how we're going to base the covert entry from that. So in terms of one tool fits all, it's really, in my opinion, situational dependent again.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would probably say along a similar line of just like the reconnaissance and pretext, I would say, again, tailgating, just from the likelihood of it working is just pretty significantly high. And again, just getting into the building, similar to external and internal networks, buildings are often the same way. Of once you're actually on the inside, the barriers to entry to get into other areas are, generally speaking, significantly lower. So tailgating extremely helpful.
Great, thanks. And we did have another question pop in. How do you describe covert entry? So when we say covert, what does that actually mean and entail?
Sure. I mean, simply put, a physical pen tester tries to break into a site undetected and gain access to, generally speaking, there's a flag of some sort or goal. Again, gain access to an IT server room, gain access to a filing cabinet with a bunch of social security numbers and client data or employee data. But yeah, at its simplest, it's break into a building undetected and achieve a goal or gain access to an asset of some form or fashion.
Thanks. When it comes to the security posture of customers in the US and versus maybe the UK or Europe or other places in the world, is there any kind of differences that you guys have noticed in testing between those different regions?
I can answer some of that. Obviously, I've only ever tested in the UK and a bit in the Middle East. So from my perspective, we always look at laws and legislations as being one of them differences. In terms of security posture, the difference is that it can be situational in terms of the north and in terms of the UK, the north and the south. We know that, and from our understanding and from our data that we collected, that the south seemed to be quite a lot more stricter than the northern part of the UK. So I've done engagements up in Manchester, up in Scotland, and with tailgating, obviously the security process seems a lot more relaxed. Just it's to do with the people, the procedures up there, whereas down in London there's obviously quite a high reputation for security, so we tend to have a lot more difficulty or have to change up the pretext in terms of sometimes we just can't tailgate. We have to come in and social engineer. So I don't know how that differs to the US. That's something that Dalton has to put in, but in terms of, there's definitely differences in terms of location between the UK from north and south. So I can imagine that can be the same in terms of the region we're looking at in terms of the US. Areas that take security more personally and regard it more highly than others. I guess it's the same.
Yeah, I would say within the US, at least in my experience, the location itself doesn't necessarily have too much of a variance. I think more of the variance comes from the things like the size of the company itself, the industry, and the industry it's in. Yeah, just thinking about it again, instances of sites I've been to that have kind of anti or man traps, so anti tailgating implementations in place versus maybe some smaller offices or just offices with, again, that they're in those other smaller offices and things of that nature. Again, maybe it's a different industry, or they just, they either don't have the budget for man traps and anti-tailgating solutions, or they may not even be aware of tailgating as like much of a security issue. Oftentimes, I think client employees will fall into the, why would someone want to break into this building? Things of that nature, essentially just it not necessarily being a conscious thought or concern in their mind from a day-to-day basis, or just something they would expect in the first place.
Thanks, guys. And I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. Again, the recording will be sent out to you, and so you'll have that, and you can rewatch it at your leisure. If there's any questions or you wanted to talk to LRQA Netitude for any kind of services or anything, please feel free to reach out to us at the email there. And thank you again. Have a great day.